The freezing rain came down in sheets so thick that Faye Tillerson could barely see her own mud-caked hands stretched out before her. But she kept moving through the streets of Golden, Colorado, because stopping meant dying, and she had not survived this long just to give up now. It was November of 1877, and the gold rush that had given this mountain town its name was long past its glory days, leaving behind a ragged collection of miners, ranchers, and desperate souls who had nowhere else to go. Faye was 22 years old, though she felt ancient as she shuffled past the saloon where warm light spilled onto the muddy street, her stomach cramping with hunger so fierce it made her eyes water. She had not eaten in 3 days, not since the boarding house owner had thrown her out for being 2 weeks behind on rent. Her dress, once a respectable gray cotton, hung on her frame like a burial shroud, soaked through and heavy with ice forming along the hem. She pressed herself against the wall of the general store, trying to find some shelter from the relentless storm, and watched through the window as families bought flour and sugar, their children pink-cheeked and healthy. The owner had chased her off twice already this week when she had tried to ask for work, for anything, even just scrubbing floors. There were no jobs for a woman alone with no family and no references, not in a town this size where everyone knew everyone and strangers were regarded with suspicion. Faye's fingers had gone numb inside her threadbare gloves, and she flexed them uselessly, trying to keep the blood flowing. She had come to Colorado with her father 2 years ago, full of hope and plans for a new start after her mother's death back in Missouri. But her father had died in a mining accident 6 months later, crushed under a ton of rock, and Faye had been alone ever since. She had worked as a seamstress for a while, then as a laundress, but the work had dried up as more families left Golden for bigger opportunities elsewhere. The rain turned to sleet, sharp little needles that stung her face and made her pull her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. She needed to find somewhere to sleep tonight, somewhere that would keep her out of this storm, or she would freeze to death before morning. She had been sleeping in an abandoned shed behind the old assay office, but the roof had collapsed 2 nights ago, leaving her with nowhere to go. Her legs felt like lead as she pushed away from the wall and continued down the street, her eyes scanning for any opportunity, any scrap of kindness. Near the edge of town, she saw a lamplight glowing in the window of the restaurant attached to the hotel, and her feet carried her there almost without conscious thought. Through the window, she could see people eating thick steaks and fried potatoes, drinking hot coffee from white porcelain cups. Her mouth watered so intensely she had to swallow several times. Faye knew better than to go inside. She had tried that yesterday at a different establishment and had been thrown out so roughly she still had a bruise on her hip. But maybe, just maybe, if she went around to the back door, they might have scraps they were throwing out. Kitchen waste. Anything. She made her way down the alley beside the building, her boots squelching in the mud and half-frozen muck. The back door of the kitchen stood slightly ajar, and she could smell bread baking, meat roasting, onions frying in butter. The scent was so overwhelming after days of hunger that she felt dizzy, and she had to steady herself against the rough wooden wall. Through the crack in the door, she could see a large woman stirring something in a pot, her face red from the heat of the stove. Faye raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What if this woman was like the others? What if she called for someone to chase her away, or worse, to have her arrested for vagrancy? But what choice did she have? She was going to die if she did not eat soon, and pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She knocked, 3 soft taps that were barely audible over the sound of the rain. The woman turned, squinting toward the door, then walked over and pulled it open wider. She was middle-aged, with gray streaking through her brown hair, and she looked Faye up and down with an expression that was hard to read. "We do not need any help," she said, starting to close the door. "Please," Faye heard herself say, hating the weakness in her voice but unable to stop. "I am not asking for work. I just wondered if you had any scraps, anything you were going to throw away. I have not eaten in days." The woman's expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. "I cannot just be giving away food, girl. The owner would have my hide. You best move along before someone sees you here." Faye nodded, swallowing hard against the tears that threatened to spill over. She would not cry. She had cried enough when her father died, and it had changed nothing. She turned to go, her vision blurring from hunger and exhaustion. "Wait," the woman said, and Faye felt a flutter of hope. But the woman just closed the door firmly, and Faye heard the bolt slide into place. She stood there for a moment, letting the sleet pelt her face, then forced herself to keep moving. There had to be something somewhere. She could not give up. She made her way back to the main street, peering into trash heaps and behind buildings, looking for anything edible. Once, she found half a potato that had been thrown out, frozen solid and covered in dirt, but she brushed it off as best she could and ate it anyway, barely tasting it. The cold was getting worse, seeping into her bones, making her thoughts slow and fuzzy. She knew the signs of exposure from the winter she and her father had spent in a drafty cabin their first months here. If she did not get warm soon, she would not wake up. At the far end of town, near where the buildings gave way to ranch land, Faye saw a large house set back from the road, with barns and outbuildings scattered around it. Lamplight glowed in several windows, warm and inviting. She knew she should not trespass on private property, but the barn looked dry and solid, and perhaps she could slip inside just for the night, bury herself in hay, and be gone before dawn. She crossed the muddy yard, moving as quietly as she could, though the storm was loud enough to cover any sound she made. The barn was a massive structure, well built and well maintained, with a wide door that stood slightly open. She slipped inside, gasping with relief as the wind and rain suddenly stopped battering her. The interior was warm, heated by the body warmth of at least a dozen horses in their stalls, and the scent of hay and animals was overwhelming after the sterile cold outside. Faye stood just inside the door, dripping onto the packed dirt floor, trying to let her eyes adjust to the dimness. There were lamps hung at intervals along the walls, turned low, casting everything in a soft golden glow. She could hear the horses moving in their stalls, the soft snorts and stamps of animals settling for the night. Toward the back, she could see a ladder leading up to a hayloft, and she thought that would be perfect. She could climb up there, burrow into the hay, and no one would even know she was here. Faye took a step forward, then another, her legs shaking with exhaustion. She had just reached the bottom of the ladder when she heard a voice behind her. "What do you think you are doing?" She spun around, nearly falling, and found herself face to face with a man who had emerged from one of the stalls. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and dark hair that was slightly damp, as though he had been out in the rain recently. He wore simple ranch clothes, a cotton shirt and denim trousers with suspenders and work boots, and he held a pitchfork in one hand, though not in a threatening way, more as though he had simply been in the middle of work. Faye opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was too cold, too tired, too overwhelmed. She just stood there, swaying slightly, her teeth chattering so hard she could not form words. The man's expression changed from suspicious to concerned as he took in her appearance, the way her clothes hung on her skeletal frame, the blue tinge to her lips, the hollows under her eyes. He set the pitchfork aside and took a step closer. "Jesus," he said quietly, "when did you last eat?" Faye tried to answer, tried to explain, but the warmth of the barn after the brutal cold outside was making her feel strange and disconnected, as though she were floating. The edges of her vision started to go dark, and she felt her legs give way beneath her. The man moved fast, catching her before she hit the ground, and she felt strong arms around her, heard him calling out something she could not quite make out. Then everything went black. When Faye woke, she was lying on something soft, covered in heavy blankets, and there was warmth all around her. For a moment, she thought she must be dreaming, or perhaps she had died and gone to heaven, because she had not been this comfortable in months. Then she became aware of voices nearby, speaking in low tones, and reality came crashing back. She opened her eyes and found herself in a bedroom, a real bedroom with papered walls and a thick rug on the floor. She was in a large bed with a carved wooden headboard, and there was a fire crackling in a fireplace across the room. The man from the barn was there, along with a woman in a sensible brown dress who was wringing out a cloth in a basin of water. "She is waking up," the woman said, and they both turned toward the bed. Faye tried to sit up, panic flooding through her. She did not belong here. These people would throw her out or call the sheriff or worse. "I am sorry," she managed to say, her voice hoarse. "I did not mean to trespass. I will leave right away." "You will do no such thing," the woman said firmly, coming over to the bed. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes. "You are half frozen and starving. You are not going anywhere until you are well." "But I cannot pay," Faye said desperately. "I do not have any money. Did I ask for payment?" The woman replied, gently pressing Faye back against the pillows. "My name is Martha Grayson, and this is my nephew, Xavier Grayson. You collapsed in his barn, and you are fortunate he found you when he did, or you would have died of exposure before morning." Faye looked at Xavier Grayson, really looked at him for the first time. He was younger than she had first thought, probably only a few years older than she was, maybe 25 or 26. His face was weathered from outdoor work, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun. But his features were strong and handsome, with a straight nose and a firm jawline. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, and they were fixed on her with an expression of concern that made something twist in her chest. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Faye," she whispered. "Faye Tillerson." "Well, Miss Tillerson, you gave me quite a scare," Xavier said. "Another hour in that storm and you would have frozen to death. What were you thinking, being out in weather like that with barely any clothes on?" "I did not have a choice," Faye said, and to her horror, she felt tears start to slide down her cheeks. "I had nowhere to go. I was just trying to survive." Martha made a soft sound of sympathy and sat down on the edge of the bed, taking Faye's hand in her own warm, dry one. "You poor child. Well, you are safe now. Let me get you something to eat and then you can rest. We will figure everything else out later." She left the room, and Xavier pulled a chair over to the bedside and sat down. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked. "How did you end up in such a state?" Faye closed her eyes, exhausted just thinking about explaining it all, but she owed him that much. Slowly, haltingly, she told him about her father's death, about the work drying up, about being evicted from the boarding house. She told him about the days of hunger, the cold nights in the abandoned shed, the desperation that had driven her to beg for scraps. Xavier listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "No one should have to live like that," he finally said, his voice tight with anger, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "This town ought to be ashamed, turning away someone in need like that. People have their own problems," Faye said wearily. "I cannot blame them for not wanting to take on another mouth to feed." "That is not an excuse," Xavier said firmly, "but never mind that now. You are here and you are safe, and we are going to make sure you get well. My aunt is the best cook in 3 counties, and she will have you fattened up in no time." Despite everything, Faye felt a small smile tug at her lips. "That is very kind of you, but I cannot impose on your hospitality for long. Perhaps once I am feeling better, I could work to earn my keep. I am a good seamstress, and I can cook and clean, and I am not afraid of hard work." "We will talk about all that later," Xavier said. "For now, just rest." Martha returned then with a tray, and the smell of food made Faye's stomach cramp with hunger. There was a bowl of rich beef broth with vegetables, a slice of buttered bread, and a cup of hot tea. It was the most beautiful thing Faye had ever seen. "Now, you need to eat this slowly," Martha warned. "Your stomach will not be able to handle too much at once after going without for so long. Small bites and give yourself time between each one." Faye nodded, taking the tray with shaking hands. The first spoonful of broth was like heaven, rich and savory and hot, warming her from the inside. She wanted to gulp it all down, but she forced herself to go slowly, aware of Martha and Xavier watching her carefully. "How long have you been running this ranch?" Faye asked between bites, partly to make conversation and partly because she was curious about these people who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "I inherited it from my uncle about 5 years ago," Xavier said. "He raised me after my parents died when I was a boy. This place has been in the Grayson family for almost 30 years now. We raise cattle mostly and some horses. My aunt came to live here after her husband passed, and she has been running the household ever since." "It is a beautiful property," Faye said, thinking of the glimpse she had gotten of the barns and outbuildings. "You must work very hard to keep it going." "I have good men working for me," Xavier said, "and I am not afraid to get my own hands dirty. Ranch work suits me better than anything else I can think of doing." Faye finished about half the broth and a few bites of bread before her stomach started to protest, and she set the tray aside reluctantly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I do not know how to repay you for this kindness." "You do not need to repay anything," Martha said briskly, taking the tray. "Now, you need to sleep. We put you in one of my nightgowns, and your clothes are drying by the kitchen fire. In the morning, we will see about finding you something more suitable to wear." "I could not possibly accept more charity," Faye protested weakly, but Martha waved her objection away. "Nonsense. I have more clothes than I need, and you are not going to freeze to death on my watch. Now, get some sleep, and we will talk more in the morning." She left, taking the tray with her, and Xavier stood as well. "She is right. You need rest. This room is yours for as long as you need it, and do not worry about anything else tonight. Just focus on getting your strength back." "Mr. Grayson," Faye said as he turned to go. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. I could be anyone." Xavier paused at the door and looked back at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Let us just say I know what it is like to be alone and afraid," he said softly. "And I believe that when you have the means to help someone, you have the responsibility to do so. Sleep well, Miss Tillerson." He left, closing the door quietly behind him, and Faye lay back against the pillows, staring up at the ceiling. She could not quite believe any of this was real. A few hours ago, she had been certain she was going to die in that freezing rain, and now she was lying in a warm bed with a full stomach, at least partially full, and people who seemed genuinely concerned about her welfare. She did not trust it. She could not trust it. In her experience, kindness always came with a price, and she was terrified to find out what Xavier Grayson would expect in return for his generosity. But she was too exhausted to worry about it now. Her eyes drifted closed, and within minutes, she was asleep. When Faye woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the window, and she could hear sounds from elsewhere in the house, footsteps and voices and the clatter of dishes. She lay still for a moment, taking stock of how she felt. Her head was clearer than it had been in days, and though she was still weak, the bone-deep exhaustion had eased somewhat. She sat up slowly, pushing back the heavy quilts and looked around the room in the daylight. It was simply furnished but comfortable, with a wardrobe in one corner, a small desk and chair near the window, and a washstand with a pitcher and basin. Her clothes from yesterday were folded neatly on the chair, clean and dry. There was a soft knock at the door, and Martha entered carrying another tray. "Good morning, dear. I thought you might like some breakfast." Faye's stomach growled at the smell of eggs and bacon and fresh biscuits. "You are too kind," she said. "I feel terrible being such a burden." "You are not a burden," Martha said firmly, setting the tray on the desk. "Now, eat up and then we will see about getting you some proper clothes. You and I are about the same height, though you are much thinner than I am. I have some dresses that should work with a little alteration." Faye ate slowly, savoring every bite while Martha bustled around the room pulling dresses from the wardrobe and holding them up critically. "This one might do," she said, examining a dark blue wool dress, "and this one as well." She added a brown calico to the pile. "Mrs. Grayson, I cannot accept all this," Faye protested. "You have already done so much." "It is Miss Grayson, actually, though I prefer Martha," the older woman said. "I was married once, a long time ago, but I have been a widow for 15 years now, and you are not accepting charity, child. You are accepting help from someone who has more than enough to share. There is a difference." Faye did not quite see the distinction, but she was in no position to argue. After she finished eating, Martha helped her wash and dress in the blue wool gown, which was indeed too large but not so much that it looked ridiculous. Martha pinned it in a few places and promised to take it in properly later. "Now, Xavier wanted to talk to you when you were feeling up to it," Martha said. "He is in his office. Do you feel strong enough to walk?" Faye nodded, though her legs felt shaky as she followed Martha out of the bedroom and through the house. The ranch house was larger than it had seemed last night, with a comfortable parlor, a formal dining room, and a big kitchen where a woman Faye did not recognize was washing dishes. Martha led her down a hallway to a door that stood slightly ajar. She knocked and then pushed it open. "Xavier, Miss Tillerson is here." Xavier looked up from the papers spread across his desk and smiled, standing up. "Miss Tillerson, please come in. How are you feeling this morning?" "Much better, thank you," Faye said, stepping into the office. It was a masculine room, with leather chairs and shelves full of books and ledgers, and a large map of Colorado on one wall. "Please, sit down," Xavier said, gesturing to one of the chairs. Martha excused herself and left, closing the door behind her. Faye sat, folding her hands in her lap, trying to appear calm even though her heart was racing. This was it, she thought. This was where he would tell her what he expected in return for his help. Xavier sat down behind his desk and regarded her thoughtfully for a moment. "Miss Tillerson, I have a proposition for you." "Here it comes," Faye thought, bracing herself. "I need a housekeeper," Xavier continued. "My aunt does her best, but she is getting older and the work is too much for her, especially with the ranch hands coming in and out all day. I have been thinking about hiring someone for months now, but I have not found the right person. If you are willing, I would like to offer you the position." Faye blinked, not quite believing what she was hearing. "A housekeeper position?" "Yes. You would have your own room, 3 meals a day, and a fair wage. In return, you would help with the cooking, cleaning, laundry, and general household management. Martha would still oversee things, but you would do most of the actual work. What do you think?" "I think that sounds too good to be true," Faye said honestly. "Why would you offer this to me? You do not know anything about me or my abilities. I know that you are willing to work hard and that you have been through more than anyone should have to endure, Xavier said. I also know that my aunt likes you, and Martha is an excellent judge of character. If you want references, I can provide them, but I think we can help each other here. You need a place to stay and honest work, and I need help running this household. It seems like a good arrangement to me. Faye stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or hidden motives, but she saw only sincerity. What if I am not good enough? What if you decide you made a mistake? Then we will figure it out, Xavier said simply. But I do not think that will happen. So what do you say, Miss Tillerson? Do you want the job? Faye felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I want the job. Thank you, Mr. Grayson. You will not regret this. I am sure I will not, Xavier said, smiling. And please call me Xavier. We are not formal here. Over the next few weeks, Faye settled into her new life at the Grayson Ranch with a sense of disbelief that never quite faded. She woke each morning in her comfortable room, dressed in the clothes Martha had altered for her, and spent her days cooking, cleaning, and managing the household. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and for the first time in months she felt like she had a purpose. Martha was patient and kind, teaching Faye the way things were done on the ranch and introducing her to the men who worked there. There were 5 ranch hands in all, ranging in age from a grizzled old cowboy named Pete, who had worked for Xavier's uncle, to a young man of 19 named Tom, who was learning the trade. They all treated Faye with respect, tipping their hats when they saw her and thanking her for the meals she helped prepare. But it was Xavier who occupied most of Faye's thoughts, though she tried hard not to let it show. He was unlike any man she had ever met, combining strength and gentleness in a way that seemed almost impossible. He worked from dawn until dusk, alongside his men, mending fences and tending cattle and breaking horses. But he always took time to ask Faye how she was doing, to make sure she was not working too hard, to thank her for her efforts. One evening, about 3 weeks after Faye had arrived, she was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Xavier came in through the back door, stamping mud off his boots. His hair was damp with sweat despite the cool November air, and there was a smudge of dirt across his cheek. "Something smells amazing," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Roast chicken with vegetables," Faye said, stirring the gravy on the stove. "It will be ready in about 20 minutes. I can hardly wait," Xavier said. He poured himself a cup of water from the pump and leaned against the counter, watching her work. "You have really transformed this place, you know. I have not eaten this well in years." Faye felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Martha taught me most of the recipes. I am just following her instructions." "You are being modest," Xavier said. "Martha told me you have a real gift in the kitchen. She also said you finished altering all those dresses and even made new curtains for the parlor. When do you sleep?" "I sleep plenty," Faye said, though in truth she often stayed up late, too restless and too aware of how precarious her situation still felt to fully relax. "I just like to keep busy." Xavier was quiet for a moment, and when Faye glanced over at him, she found him studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "You know you do not have to prove yourself, right?" he said softly. "You have more than earned your place here. You can slow down a little." "I do not mind the work," Faye said, focusing on the gravy so she would not have to meet his eyes. "I am just grateful to have it." "Still," Xavier said, "I do not want you to burn yourself out. Maybe tomorrow, if you are not too busy, you could take a walk with me. I want to show you some of the ranch, the parts you have not seen yet." Faye's heart skipped a beat. "A walk, just a walk," Xavier said, but there was something in his tone that suggested it might be more than that. "I think you would like the view from the ridge. You can see for miles from up there." "I would like that," Faye heard herself say, "if Martha does not need me." "I will make sure Martha does not need you," Xavier said, grinning. "It is settled then. Tomorrow afternoon after the midday meal." He left to wash up for dinner, and Faye stood at the stove, her heart racing. She told herself she was being foolish, that Xavier was just being kind, that he probably did this for all his employees. But she could not quite convince herself of that, because she had seen the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, and it was the same way she looked at him. The next day, after the dishes from the midday meal were washed and put away, Faye changed into her warmest dress and a cloak that Martha had given her, and met Xavier in the front yard. He had 2 horses saddled and waiting, a large bay gelding for himself and a smaller chestnut mare for Faye. "I hope you know how to ride," Xavier said, holding the mare's reins. "I should have asked." "My father taught me when I was young," Faye said, though it had been years since she had been on a horse. "I am a little rusty, but I will manage." Xavier helped her mount, his hand steadying her as she settled into the saddle, and then he swung up onto his own horse with easy grace. They rode out of the yard and across the open pasture, where cattle grazed in the pale winter sunlight. The sky was a brilliant blue, cloudless and vast, and the mountains rose in the distance, their peaks dusted with snow. "It is beautiful here," Faye said, breathing in the crisp, clean air. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she had forgotten to notice the beauty of the world around her. "I never get tired of it," Xavier said. "Every day is different. Every season brings something new. This land gets in your blood if you let it." They rode for about half an hour, following a trail that wound up into the foothills, until they reached a ridge that overlooked the ranch and the valley beyond. Xavier had been right about the view. It was spectacular, with the land spreading out below them in shades of gold and brown, and the town of Golden just visible in the distance. They dismounted and stood side by side, looking out over the landscape. Faye was acutely aware of how close Xavier was standing, near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool air. "I come up here when I need to think," Xavier said after a long moment of silence. "It reminds me of how small my problems are in the grand scheme of things." "It must be a comfort having a place like this," Faye said. "It is," Xavier agreed. He turned to look at her and his expression was serious. "Faye, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Faye said, though her stomach tightened with nervousness. "Why did you stay in Golden after your father died? Why did you not try to go somewhere else, somewhere with more opportunities?" Faye looked down at her hands. "I did not have the money for a ticket anywhere, and I suppose I was afraid. My father and we had planned to build a life here together. After he died, I kept thinking that if I just waited a little longer, worked a little harder, everything would get better. By the time I realized it was not going to get better, I was too poor and too desperate to do anything about it." "I understand that," Xavier said quietly. "After my uncle died, I thought about selling this place and going east, starting fresh somewhere where no one knew me. But I could not do it. This ranch was his legacy, and it felt like I would be betraying him if I gave it up." "Do you ever regret staying?" Faye asked. "Not anymore," Xavier said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up at him. He was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Especially not since you came here." Faye's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Mr. Grayson, Xavier, I do not think you should say things like that." "Why not?" Xavier asked. "It is the truth. You have brought life back to this place, Faye. You have brought life back to me. These past few weeks, I have looked forward to every day in a way I have not in years, and it is because of you." "You barely know me," Faye whispered, even as her heart soared at his words. "I know enough," Xavier said. He reached out and gently took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused from hard work, and his touch sent shivers up her arm. "I know that you are strong and brave and kind. I know that you face every challenge without complaint. I know that when you smile, which is not often enough, it lights up the whole room. And I know that I have been falling in love with you since the moment I caught you in the barn." Faye stared at him, unable to speak. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. She had never expected anyone to say anything like that to her. "You do not have to say anything back," Xavier continued, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I know this is sudden and you have been through so much. I just wanted you to know how I feel. And I want you to know that whatever happens, you always have a place here. Not as an employee, but as someone I care about deeply." Faye found her voice, though it came out shaky. "I do not know what to say. I never imagined that someone like you could have feelings for someone like me." "Someone like me," Xavier repeated, looking puzzled. "Faye, I am just a rancher. You make it sound like I am royalty or something." "You are a good man," Faye said. "A kind, generous man who saved my life. And I am just a woman who was begging for scraps in the rain." Xavier's expression turned fierce. "You are so much more than that. Do not ever let me hear you talk about yourself that way again. You are incredible, Faye Tillerson, and I am the lucky one here." Before Faye could respond, Xavier leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative at first, as though he was giving her the chance to pull away. But when she did not, when instead she found herself leaning into him, the kiss deepened. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and Faye let herself sink into the embrace, let herself believe, just for a moment, that this could be real. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I have wanted you to," Faye said, and then she laughed, a sound of pure joy that surprised her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed like that. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. Finally, as the air grew colder, Xavier suggested they head back. They rode down the ridge together, and this time when they talked, it was easier, more natural. Xavier told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to expand the herd and maybe start breeding better quality horses. Faye told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother who had been a talented seamstress and had taught Faye everything she knew. When they arrived back at the ranch house, Martha was waiting on the porch, a knowing smile on her face. "Did you two have a nice ride?" she asked innocently. "Very nice," Xavier said, helping Faye dismount. His hand lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, and Faye felt her cheeks flush. That night after dinner, Martha pulled Faye aside while Xavier was in his office doing paperwork. "I see the way you two look at each other," she said bluntly, "and I approve." Faye felt her face go red. "Martha, I do not know what you mean." "Oh, do not play coy with me, child," Martha said, but her tone was affectionate. "Xavier has not looked this happy in years, and neither have you. I just want you to know that I think you are perfect for each other." "I am afraid," Faye admitted quietly. "Everything has happened so fast. A month ago I was starving and homeless. Now I am living here and Xavier says he has feelings for me, and I do not know if I can trust it." "What if it all falls apart?" Martha took Faye's hands in hers. "Life does not come with guarantees, dear, but I can tell you that my nephew is one of the most honorable men I have ever known. If he says he cares for you, then he means it with his whole heart. The question is, do you care for him?" "Yes," Faye said without hesitation. "I think I have been falling in love with him since that first night when he was so kind even though he had no reason to be." "Then do not let fear hold you back," Martha said firmly. "Take a chance on happiness." You deserve it after everything you have been through." Over the next few weeks, Faye and Xavier's relationship deepened and grew. They were careful to be discreet around the ranch hands, not wanting to cause gossip, but when they were alone, they were inseparable. Xavier taught Faye to ride better, and they took long rides through the property, exploring every corner of his land. Faye showed Xavier how to make his favorite childhood dessert, an apple pie that his mother used to make, and he proclaimed it the best thing he had ever tasted. They talked about everything, sharing their hopes and fears and dreams. Xavier told Faye about the loneliness he had felt after his uncle died, about the weight of responsibility that came with running the ranch alone. Faye told Xavier about the guilt she felt over her father's death, about how she sometimes wondered if she could have done something to prevent it. "It was an accident," Xavier said gently one evening as they sat together in the parlor, the fire crackling in the hearth. "You could not have stopped it. I know that in my head," Faye said, "but my heart still carries the weight of it." Xavier pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I understand," he said. "I felt the same way after my uncle passed. He had a bad heart, and the doctor had warned him to slow down, but he would not listen. I kept thinking that if I had just tried harder to make him rest, maybe he would still be here." "How did you move past it?" Faye asked. "I realized that I was not honoring his memory by dwelling on guilt," Xavier said. "The best way to honor him was to live the life he wanted for me, to be happy and to make this ranch thrive. I think your father would want the same for you." Faye knew he was right. Her father had always told her to look forward, not back, to find joy wherever she could. She thought he would have liked Xavier very much. As December arrived and the weather turned colder, preparations for Christmas began. Martha was in her element, baking cookies and cakes and planning a big dinner. Xavier brought in a large pine tree from the property, and they spent an evening decorating it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments that Faye made. It was the first Christmas in 2 years that Faye had felt any sense of joy, and she found herself looking forward to the holiday with genuine excitement. On Christmas Eve, after the ranch hands had gone to their bunkhouse and Martha had retired for the night, Xavier asked Faye to come out to the porch with him. The sky was clear and filled with stars, and the air was so cold their breath came out in white puffs. "I have something for you," Xavier said, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. "Xavier, you should not have," Faye protested, even as she took the package with trembling hands. "I did not get you anything." "You have given me more than you know," Xavier said. "Open it." Faye unwrapped the package carefully and found a delicate gold locket inside. She opened it and saw that Xavier had placed a tiny photograph of the two of them inside, one that had been taken by a traveling photographer who had come through Golden a few weeks earlier. "It is beautiful," Faye whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "There is something else," Xavier said. He took the locket from her and fastened it around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. Then he took both of her hands in his and looked into her eyes. "Faye, these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. I know it has not been long, but when you know, you know. I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Faye felt as though her heart might burst. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Xavier pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Faye thought that this was what happiness felt like, this overwhelming sense of rightness and belonging. When they finally pulled apart, Xavier was grinning like a fool. "I was so nervous," he admitted. "I thought maybe it was too soon, that you would think I was crazy." "I think you are wonderful," Faye said, "and I love you too." "I should have said that first, but I was so shocked I could hardly think." They went inside and woke Martha to tell her the news, and she hugged them both, tears streaming down her face. "I knew it," she said. "I knew from the first night that you two were meant for each other. Oh, this is the best Christmas present I could have asked for." The wedding was planned for early spring, after the worst of the winter weather had passed. Faye spent the intervening months making her dress, a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk that Martha had saved from her own wedding. The older woman insisted, saying that it would be an honor to see it worn again by someone she cared about so deeply. As the wedding day approached, Faye found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in just a few short months. She had gone from the lowest point of her existence, cold and starving and hopeless, to a place of love and security that she had never imagined possible. Sometimes she still woke in the middle of the night, afraid that it was all a dream, but then she would remember the weight of the locket around her neck and know that it was real. The wedding took place on a bright April morning at the small church in Golden. It was a simple ceremony, attended by Martha, the ranch hands, and a few neighbors who had become friends. Faye wore wildflowers in her hair, picked that morning from the meadow behind the ranch house, and Xavier wore his best suit, looking so handsome that Faye could hardly believe he was hers. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with such tenderness that Faye felt tears slip down her cheeks. They were tears of joy this time, not sorrow, and she did not bother to wipe them away. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with a feast that Martha had been preparing for days. There was roast beef and potatoes, fresh bread, 3 kinds of pie, and a beautiful cake decorated with sugar flowers. The ranch hands played fiddle music, and Xavier danced with Faye in the front yard, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. As the sun began to set, and the guests started to leave, Xavier led Faye to the house he had been quietly preparing for them over the past few weeks. It was a smaller structure about 100 yards from the main house, freshly painted and furnished with simple but sturdy furniture that Xavier had made himself. "I wanted us to have our own place," he explained as he carried her over the threshold. "But close enough that Martha does not feel abandoned." "It is perfect," Faye said, looking around at the cozy space. There was a sitting room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a bedroom with a large bed covered in one of Martha's quilts. "I cannot believe you did all this without me noticing." "I am sneaky when I want to be," Xavier said, setting her down gently. He cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with such love that it took her breath away. "Are you happy, Mrs. Grayson?" "Happier than I ever thought possible," Faye said honestly. "I still cannot believe this is my life now." "Believe it," Xavier said, kissing her forehead, then her nose, then her lips, "because I am never letting you go." That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left Faye feeling more connected to Xavier than she had ever felt to another human being. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, the moonlight streaming through the window, and talked about their future. "I want children," Xavier said, running his fingers through her hair. "At least 3 or 4 if we are blessed." "I want that too," Faye said. "I want to fill this house with love and laughter and noise." "We will," Xavier promised. "We will build a good life together, Faye, I swear it." The first year of their marriage was everything Faye could have hoped for and more. She settled into her role as Xavier's wife, working alongside Martha to manage the household while also helping Xavier with ranch business. She discovered that she had a good head for numbers and began keeping the books, organizing the accounts in a way that made it easier to track expenses and profits. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Xavier expanded the herd as he had planned, and they began breeding better quality horses that fetched high prices at market. Faye started a vegetable garden and began canning and preserving food for the winter, skills she had learned from her mother and now put to good use. They worked hard, but they also made time for each other, for long rides and quiet evenings by the fire and lazy Sunday mornings in bed. In the fall of their first year together, Faye discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier over dinner one evening, watching his face as the news sank in. For a moment he just stared at her, and then he let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around. "Careful," Faye said, laughing. "You will make me dizzy." "I am going to be a father," Xavier said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "We are going to have a baby." "I cannot believe it. This is the best news ever." Martha was equally thrilled, immediately beginning to knit tiny sweaters and booties. The ranch hands all offered their congratulations, and Pete, the oldest of the cowboys, whittled a beautiful wooden rattle as a gift. The pregnancy was not easy. Faye suffered from terrible nausea in the early months and spent much of her time feeling exhausted and miserable. But Xavier was endlessly patient and supportive, bringing her ginger tea and dry toast when she could not keep anything else down, rubbing her feet when they swelled, and reading to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but lie on the sofa. As winter turned to spring, Faye's belly grew round and full, and she found herself moving more slowly, more carefully. Martha insisted she stop doing any heavy work, and Xavier hovered over her constantly, much to her amused exasperation. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one day when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know, but I worry," Xavier said. "You and this baby are the most important things in the world to me. I just want to make sure you are both safe." "We are safe," Faye assured him, "but I appreciate how much you care." In late May, on a warm afternoon with the windows open and a gentle breeze blowing through the house, Faye went into labor. Martha sent one of the ranch hands for the doctor while she helped Faye into bed and began preparing everything they would need. Xavier paced back and forth in the front room, looking terrified. "She is going to be all right, is she not?" he asked Martha when she came out to get more towels. "She is strong and healthy," Martha said firmly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. She will be fine." But even Martha looked relieved when the doctor arrived an hour later. The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the night. Xavier refused to leave, staying by Faye's side the entire time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement even when she squeezed his fingers so hard he thought they might break. Finally, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, their son was born. He came into the world with a loud, healthy cry, and Faye sobbed with relief and joy as the doctor placed the baby in her arms. "He is perfect," she whispered, looking down at the tiny, red-faced infant. He had dark hair like his father and was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Xavier leaned over to look at his son, and there were tears streaming down his face. "He is amazing," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are amazing. I love you so much, Faye." "I love you too," Faye said. "We did it. We made this perfect little person." They named him William, after Xavier's uncle, with the middle name of James after Faye's father. Billy, as they immediately began calling him, was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's delicate features. Martha doted on him shamelessly, spending hours rocking him and singing old lullabies. The ranch hands took turns whittling toys for him and competed to see who could make him smile first. And Xavier was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with Billy at night when he was fussy, completely unashamed to do the work that many men considered beneath them. As Billy grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Xavier and Faye worked together to build the business, making smart decisions that paid off in increased profits. They were able to hire more ranch hands, which took some of the burden off Xavier, and allowed him to spend more time with his family. When Billy was 2 years old, Faye became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she was able to continue her normal routine with few problems. Their second son, Henry, was born in the spring of 1881, another healthy, beautiful baby who looked like a miniature version of his older brother. "You make handsome sons," Xavier told Faye as they sat together in the parlor one evening, watching Billy play with his toy soldiers while Henry dozed in Faye's arms. "We make handsome sons," Faye corrected him. "This is a team effort, remember? How could I forget?" Xavier said, leaning over to kiss her. "You are the one doing all the hard work." Life settled into a happy rhythm. The boys grew quickly, becoming curious, energetic children who kept their parents constantly on their toes. Billy was serious and thoughtful, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. Henry was more carefree and adventurous, always getting into mischief and making everyone laugh. Martha remained a vital part of their lives, though she was slowing down as the years passed. She still supervised the household and spoiled her great-nephews rotten, but she spent more time resting, letting Faye and a young woman they had hired named Sarah handle most of the daily work. When Billy was 5 and Henry was 3, Faye found herself pregnant for a third time. She was 30 years old now, and this pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. She was exhausted all the time, and her back ached constantly. But she refused to complain, focusing instead on the joy of bringing another child into their loving family. Their daughter, Rose, was born in the winter of 1883, a tiny, delicate baby with wisps of red gold hair and green eyes. Faye cried when she first held her, overwhelmed by the rush of love she felt for this precious little girl. "Now our family is complete," Xavier said, looking down at Rose with wonder. "2 sons and a daughter, we are truly blessed." "We are," Faye agreed. "I never dreamed I could be this happy." As the years passed and the children grew, Faye often thought back to that terrible night when she had been begging for scraps in the freezing rain, convinced she was going to die alone and forgotten. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. The frightened, starving woman she had been then bore little resemblance to the confident, content woman she was now. She had built a good life with Xavier, better than anything she could have imagined. Their marriage was strong, founded on mutual respect and genuine partnership. They worked together, laughed together, supported each other through challenges, and celebrated each other's successes. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1888 at the age of 75. It was a loss that hit the entire family hard, particularly Xavier, who had loved his aunt dearly. They buried her next to her husband in the small cemetery outside Golden, and Xavier made sure her grave was marked with a beautiful headstone that captured her kindness and strength. "She would be proud of what we have built here," Faye told Xavier as they stood by the grave after the funeral. "She would be proud of our children and the life we have made." "I hope so," Xavier said quietly. "She was the one who encouraged me to offer you that job, you know. After you collapsed in the barn, I wanted to take you into town the next morning, find you a place at the boarding house or something. But Martha insisted we keep you here. She said she could see something special in you, and she was right." "I am glad she convinced you," Faye said, taking his hand. "I am glad for everything that has happened since that night, even the hard parts, because they led me to you." By the time Billy was 15, Henry was 13, and Rose was 10, the ranch had grown to encompass nearly 2,000 acres. Billy was already working alongside his father, learning the business and showing a natural aptitude for ranch management. Henry was more interested in horses than cattle and spent hours training young colts with patience and skill beyond his years. Rose, meanwhile, had inherited her mother's talent for numbers and was already helping with the ranch accounts, her quick mind impressing everyone who worked with her. Faye looked at her children with pride, knowing that they would carry on the legacy that she and Xavier had built together. They were good kids, kind and hardworking and full of promise, and she knew that their future was bright. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Faye back up to the ridge where he had first told her he loved her. They rode the same path they had taken all those years ago, though both of them were older now, with streaks of gray in their hair and lines on their faces that spoke of years spent laughing and living. They stood at the edge of the ridge, looking out over the land that had become so much more than just property. It was their home, their legacy, the place where they had built a life together from nothing. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Xavier asked, slipping his arm around Faye's waist. "Of course," Faye said. "I thought you were crazy declaring your love for someone you barely knew." "I was not crazy," Xavier protested. "I was absolutely right, best decision I ever made." "It was pretty good," Faye agreed, smiling up at him. "I suppose I will keep you around a little longer." "Only a little longer," Xavier said, pretending to be offended. "I was hoping for at least another 50 years. "We will see," Faye said. "You have not been too annoying so far." Xavier laughed and pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, Faye Grayson. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on a simple rancher with big dreams. Thank you for giving me a feast when I was begging for scraps," Faye said softly. "Thank you for giving me a future when I thought I had none. Thank you for loving me when I did not think I deserved to be loved." "You have always deserved to be loved," Xavier said fiercely. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sun set over the mountains. The wind carried the scent of pine and sage, and in the distance, they could hear the sound of cattle lowing and horses neighing. It was the sound of home, of life, of everything they had built together. As darkness began to fall and the first stars appeared in the sky, they mounted their horses and rode back down to the ranch, where lights glowed warmly in the windows and their children waited for them. Faye looked at the life she had created, at the man riding beside her and the home they were returning to, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had been given a second chance when she had been at her lowest point, and she had made the most of it. She had worked hard, loved deeply, and built a life that was richer and fuller than she had ever imagined possible. And as they reached the ranch house and Xavier helped her dismount, his hands gentle and familiar, Faye knew that she would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought her here. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and occasional challenges. Billy married a sweet young woman named Catherine when he was 23, and they built a house on the western edge of the property, close enough to help with the ranch but far enough to have their own space. They gave Faye and Xavier their first grandchildren, twin boys born in the summer of 1896, and the entire family celebrated the arrival of the next generation. Henry followed his brother's example and married 2 years later, choosing a spirited woman named Alina who shared his passion for horses. They built their own home on the eastern side of the ranch and started breeding championship cutting horses that were sought after throughout Colorado and beyond. Rose, independent and brilliant, went to Denver to attend a women's college, becoming one of the first in her family to pursue higher education. She returned home with a degree in business and helped modernize the ranch's operations, implementing new accounting systems and marketing strategies that increased their profits even further. She married a lawyer from Golden named Thomas when she was 25, and they divided their time between a house in town and the ranch. By the time Faye turned 50, the ranch employed over 20 people and had become one of the most successful operations in the state. But more important than the financial success was the family they had built, the strong bonds between parents and children and grandchildren that formed the true foundation of their legacy. Xavier retired from the day-to-day operations of the ranch when he was 55, turning over management to Billy while remaining available for advice and guidance. He spent his time teaching his grandchildren to ride, working in the garden Faye had expanded over the years, and taking long walks with his wife through the property they both loved so much. On one of those walks, when they were both in their late 50s, Xavier turned to Faye and said, "I have been thinking about something." "That is always dangerous," Faye teased, but she saw that he was serious. "I want to establish a fund," Xavier said. "Something that will help people who find themselves in the situation you were in all those years ago. People who are desperate and alone and need a second chance." Faye stopped walking and stared at him. "Xavier, that is a wonderful idea." "I thought we could work with the church in Golden," Xavier continued, warming to the subject. "Set up a system where people in need can get temporary housing and help finding work. Not charity exactly, but a hand up when they need it most." "I would like that," Faye said, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "I would like that very much. It would be a way of paying forward the kindness you showed me." They established the fund the following year, and it quickly became an important resource for the struggling community. Dozens of people were helped over the years, given food, shelter, and assistance in finding employment. Some moved on to other places, but others stayed in Golden and became valued members of the community. Faye personally interviewed everyone who applied for assistance, always looking for the same qualities she hoped Xavier had seen in her: determination, integrity, and the willingness to work hard for a better life. As Faye approached her 60th birthday in 1899, she found herself reflecting on the incredible journey her life had been. She was a grandmother now, with 7 grandchildren and another on the way. Her hair was more gray than brown, and her hands were marked with age spots and the calluses of a lifetime of hard work. But she had never felt more beautiful, more content, more grateful for the life she had been given. Xavier, now 62, had aged as well, but he was still strong and vital, still capable of long days of work when needed. His hair had gone completely white, and deep lines bracketed his mouth and eyes, but to Faye, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him in the barn. On the evening of her birthday, the entire family gathered at the main ranch house for a celebration. The long table Martha had once presided over was now crowded with children and grandchildren, all talking and laughing and reaching for the elaborate meal that Rose and Catherine had prepared together. Looking around at all the faces, seeing the love and happiness that filled the room, Faye felt overwhelmed with emotion. Xavier stood and tapped his glass, calling for quiet. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice still strong despite his years. "To my beautiful wife, who has made the last 22 years the best of my life. When I found you in that barn, Faye, I thought I was saving you. But the truth is, you saved me. You brought light and love and purpose to my life, and every day since has been a gift. Happy birthday, my darling. Here is to many more years together." Everyone raised their glasses, and Faye stood up, going to Xavier and wrapping her arms around him. "I love you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything. For the life we have built, for our beautiful family, for never giving up on me even when I wanted to give up on myself." "Never," Xavier said, holding her tight. "I could never give up on you. You are my heart, Faye. You are my everything." As the party continued around them, with grandchildren running around and their own children deep in conversation, Faye and Xavier stood together, still holding each other, still as in love as they had been on that cold Christmas Eve when Xavier had asked her to marry him. The new century arrived with great celebration throughout Golden and across the nation. Faye and Xavier watched with interest as the world changed around them, as automobiles began to appear on the streets and electricity started to replace oil lamps. But at the ranch, life continued much as it always had, with the rhythms of the seasons and the work that needed to be done. Faye continued to be active in the community and the fund they had established, though she moved more slowly now and needed frequent rests. Xavier remained her constant companion, always at her side, anticipating her needs before she could voice them. Their love had deepened and matured over the decades, becoming something profound and unshakable. On a warm June evening in 1905, when Faye was 66 and Xavier was 69, they sat together on the porch of their small house, watching the sun set over the mountains as they had done countless times before. The air was sweet with the scent of roses from Faye's garden, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing. "You remember that night in the freezing rain?" Faye asked, though she knew Xavier would understand exactly what she meant. "I remember," Xavier said, taking her hand and threading his fingers through hers. "I remember thinking I had never seen anyone look so lost and so brave at the same time." "I was terrified," Faye admitted. "I thought I was going to die." "But you did not," Xavier said. "You survived and you thrived and you built an incredible life. You inspire me every day, Faye. You always have." "We built this life together," Faye corrected him. "I could not have done any of it without you. You were the one who saw something worth saving in a desperate woman begging for scraps. You were the one who gave me not just food, but hope. You gave me a future when I had none. And you gave me a reason to believe in love again," Xavier said. "You gave me a family and a purpose beyond just running a ranch. You made this house a home." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Faye felt the weight of years and love and memory, felt the profound rightness of this moment, of this life they had created together. "No regrets?" Xavier asked softly. "Not a single one," Faye said, and she meant it with her whole heart. "Everything brought me to you, and that makes it all worthwhile." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Xavier leaned over and kissed his wife, a gentle kiss full of tenderness and devotion. And Faye knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the right person, living exactly the life she was meant to live. The ranch would continue on after them, passed down through the generations they had created together. The fund would help countless more people find their way out of desperation and into hope. But their true legacy was the love they had shared, the example they had set, and the proof that even in the darkest moments, kindness and compassion could change everything. Faye had been begging for scraps in freezing rain, lost and alone and certain her story was over. But Xavier Grayson had given her a feast and a future, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting and true. And that, Faye thought as she rested her head on her husband's shoulder and watched the stars emerge one by one, was the greatest blessing of all.